All right, good evening, everybody. It's now 6:32, so let's go ahead and call to order this evening of the Public Safety Services and Delivery Working Group for February 5th, 2024. And if we could have roll call, Ray.
Jordan Wittrin.
Present.
Jeffrey won, the mayor appointed him to replace him on the committee, and Jeffrey said he was going to be late this evening.
Yep, I got a text though, he has work and he is excused.
Yeah, I know he had a shift yet. Carol Allen.
Here.
Victoria Rizzo.
Here.
Twyla Harrington.
Here.
Tanny Stephenson.
Here.
Rich Allen.
Here.
Roll is complete, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm going to start this evening by, let's have the Pledge of Allegiance. Could all stand? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I'm going to open it up for public comment this evening. If anybody has any public comment out in Zoom, please take yourself off mute. Identify yourself and your city of residence. And I'm just logging onto Zoom, but I'm not seeing Paul. No. Okay, anybody out here in chambers tonight for public comment on a non-agenda item?
Not us.
Nope,
We're just here viewing.
not it. Okay, got it. All right, so we're gonna move on to number 3, consent agenda. For the minutes for November 13th of our 2023, our regular meeting. Everybody had a chance to review. Any questions or concerns with or discussion on our minutes from November 13th? Okay, no comments. So all in favor of consent agenda for the minutes of November 13th, please say aye. Oh, I'm sorry. Entertain a motion.
I'll make a, Ms. Carol, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of November 13th.
Sorry, I have blanks in this form I'm told to fill out.
And I'll second.
Okay, I've got a motion by Carol and a second by Victoria. And no other discussion points? At this time, all in favor of this consent agenda for the November 13th minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that will pass. We're gonna move right into number 4, and I believe we have,
Wanted
yes, sir.
to bring up an item. The appointment of Jeffrey One, can that be discussed at some point this evening?
My only suggestion, Chair, is it be discussed with Counselor One. As a general rule, I'm always in favor of, if you want to discuss someone, you should do it with them.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I just don't want to get to a situation where,
Yeah, I mean, Jeffrey is not here tonight, this evening, and
And won't be here this evening?
he is, the last communication I got was he is hoping to listen in just as soon as he can. And at that time, if he happens to jump on and toward the closing comments, then maybe we could have a discussion at that time. But if not, then maybe we could also, happy to take it offline too. Okay.
Thank you.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah.
You should be present.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying he shouldn't be present. I just want to make sure that we addressed it.
We are all good, Danny.
and
But
just so you
do-
know, I don't like anybody to be surprised. I let him know of the concern. So he's aware of the concern.
Yeah, and I honestly, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, I think just having a frank conversation amongst everybody just is always good to have dialogue. So, Better, more communication, the better.
Correct. Thank you.
Yep. So once again, just keep the meeting rolling, and we're going to jump right into number 4, introduction of Captain Asbo and Carrie Sullivan.
All right.
All right, so I think we have Captain Asbo online currently. Doug, can you hear us?
Yep, I am here, as long as
Okay.
everyone can hear me.
And I think everyone is aware that Captain Asbo is our designated chief of police for the city and has been so for about a year.
Yeah, maybe a little more.
Yes, sir.
About that. And then the other guest is Carrie Sullivan, who is seated here in the first row. Carrie works for Jensen Strategies, is the company that the city is engaging to help us complete the cost to create a Troutdale Police Department, either in setup costs and in ongoing costs. Carrie has been in law enforcement for 30 years. He is the former chief of police for Woodland, California and Hillsboro, Oregon. And he is here as a resource to us, as he'll be working at Jensen Strategies to help us come up with what that budget looks like. So that's why they are here tonight.
Can you elaborate a little bit more? When you say a resource to us, does that mean an actual paid consultant? Can you elaborate on what that means?
First of all, tonight, he is here just to give any feedback or any questions you may have regarding the FTE, the size of the Troutdale Police Department. Yes, he is hired. Yes, he's being paid to be here.
Okay.
We have, in your packet should have been the scope of work contract with Jensen Strategies and the work
Okay.
they're going to be doing for us. And he's the point person at Jensen Strategies for that work. So yes, he is being paid to help us work through what it would involve to, if the citizens chose this route to recreate a Troutdale Police Department, what would that entail in terms of costs and ongoing costs?
Thank you. All right. Doug, are you taking this away?
Well, I think that I'm really just here as a resource to answer questions as they come up. I wasn't provided with the packet, so I only have a single document, which is the comparison FTE sheet for some various similarly sized cities. I will absolutely be available to answer questions, but I think probably starting off with the other speaker would be best, and we'll kind of go from there. I do have some thoughts on the FTE document, but we can talk about those as it becomes appropriate.
Captain Asbo, I'm going to email you that packet here in about 4 to 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Sounds good. I just didn't know if we owned any more on the introduction part, if we were good.
No, that was
So,
it. I just wanted
okay.
to make sure who was here, so they wonder who the stranger was sitting in the front row. And
Fantastic.
yeah.
Okay. Review of the new mission and direction from council.
Everybody may have already seen live or Memorex, the council discussion from last time. It's pretty short. The council said, thank you, you guys did a wonderful job in coming up with recommendations. Now, we would like you to follow through on those recommendations for us and start doing the real work of getting the information that you said that we need. As some of you were there, some of you spoke to it, and you could add to it. I think, you know, as several members were here, such as yourself, Councilor Wittrin and Carol and Tanny were here. It's basically, you guys have the experience of going through the information before. We want you to keep doing it and actually start gathering information and come up with a recommendation for us. But go ahead and do the things you told us we should do. That's pretty much it. I don't know if anybody who was there wants to add anything more, who watched the video.
Yeah, I don't know how many people were able to watch the conversation or hear the conversation either live or after the fact. There was rather robust conversation in council chambers when it came to reconstituting this group and what the scope of work was going to be. There was talk of limiting the scope of work, and then at the end of the day, it all came right back to this group to lay both sides of the coin, both police and fire. and pretty much just said, hey, keep running with it, and we're gonna go. So I'd be interested on Tanny's take of sitting on the other side of the desk of if he wants to add his sights and sounds from that conversation.
I guess, well, the other side of the desk, I guess I would say, I was surprised that we were breaking police and fire up and looking at those independently. I didn't understand that, that decision had been made. And so that was kind of a surprise to me, because I think that the two are interconnected more than we realize. And so that was a bit of a surprise. And then with some counselors being disappointed with the work that the committee did, that was surprising to me as well. I thought the discussion was good that evening, though.
Okay. And I'll say, you know, my takeaway, even though the perception was that whether or not the committee did good work or didn't do good work, I never had that into question. I think it was more of the question of the suggestion was made to take off fire, and then the council going back and forth of whether or not to separate or not to separate, to what degree to separate, whether or not part of that fell on council or not, and the disagreement within council of what direction we were going to go as well. And then not informing this group as a body, just running with a suggestion. I don't think there was good communication there overall. So, but great.
The only reason that staff suggested they be separated was because in some ways, the decision-making process is very different. When it comes to police services, Troutdale is really the only one that has to make a decision on what they want to do. What do we want, and how much do we want to pay for it? And will either Multnomah County, Gresham pay for it, or do we want to pay for it and start our own Troutdale Police Department? So we kind of have, it's all within Troutdale to make that decision on our law enforcement services. The fire services is a different beast because it involves involvement with other people as well. Troutdale cannot just go out and make a decision on fire in a vacuum. We have to work with the city of Gresham, and we have to work with Fairview and Wood Village, and we have to work with Fire District 10. The heck, they own our fire station. And there's also the issue of creation or joining the Fire District 10. There's also the issue, does Gresham want to join Fire District 10? The last time they asked their citizens 18 years ago, they voted it down 2-1. Gresham and Fairview are running into serious budgetary issues, and Gresham has already threatened us that they're going to almost double our cost for fire, which comes out of the general fund from $2.5 to almost $5 million. So we have a lot of outside people and agencies that can influence our fire choices and how we go about the fire coverage. That's why tonight I wanted to ask the committee to focus on police tonight, because that's the one that I think is easier to come up with the information that's going to be needed to decide how much it would take to start the Troutdale Police Department, and what kind of details do we want to propose to Multnomah County Sheriff and or Gresham Police, kind of give them that, this is the service we want, how much is it going to be, so they can start working on bids for us. And so we can kind of create that now and get going on that side of the equation. And then let's take on the big beast, which is fire, and decide about, all right, which direction should we suggest they go? So that's kind of why I separated them, because, you know, one seems a little more contained and able for us to decide which to go forward with information. The fire involves a lot of political entities, and it's there are different options there, whether we pay for it out of general fund, or we ask the citizens to approve joining Fire District 10, or create a new fire district as a possibility too. So that's the reason I kind of approach them differently, but hey, you guys are more capable of handling both.
So is Fire District 1 not an option anymore?
That's another long discussion on another night. Fire District 1 is still there. It's a little premature to talk about them at this point, is all I'll say, because I've talked to Fire District 10, and like I said, there's a lot of moving pieces in the fire discussion, a lot.
All right, so we're focusing on police.
In fact, I'll be honest with you, it scares me more than the law enforcement side in terms of what could happen.
Okay. Just moving on, so reviewing budget and staffing for hypothetical Troutdale Police Department. Is this you, Ray, or is this?
Yeah, it's me again. I'll
Okay.
start it. What you were provided in the packet was our last budget in 2014-15 for the Troutdale Police Department. Going through all the FTEs that were there. And you also have, it may not be apples to apples, but you've got the FTE that we contract with the sheriff's office, which is a little bit different because it's blended into a larger agency. And the other is I had this spreadsheet created for you just to give you some comparisons. I picked the 3 or 4 cities with more right above us in population, and the 3 or 4 cities right below us in population in the state of Oregon who had their own police departments, just to give you an idea of what their general fund revenue was, what their property tax revenues were, what their operating budget for their police department was, what was their total FTE for the department. And these are total FTEs, not just sworn officers. And then also has how many sworn in those agencies. It's hard to follow all of, some of the cities were able to give us some information regarding their shifts and how much coverage they had. That's a little more vague because every city does coverage differently. And this is probably what Carrie and Captain Asbo can tell you. When I was talking to Happy Valley a couple weeks ago, they have a contract with Clackamas County Sheriff, and they have 2 deputies on the road 24/7, and they have 1 deputy on the road, like the 15 or 16 hours, basically day shift and swing shift, because most of the calls occur between 7 a.m. and midnight. And so the graveyard, they kind of cut back a little bit. And so it's kind of different coverage. And some of you were around back then on the budget committee, probably Tanny and Rich. The Troutdale Police Department, as configured in this budget, provided 2 officers in cars on the road 24/7, had a sergeant approximately 2/3 of the time, and had a full-time chief. We also had, you can see the numbers on there, records people and a detective and a administrative person.
And a full-time lieutenant.
And the full-time lieutenant, yeah. And so I think the question for you tonight is, looking at what the other cities have in terms of FTE, looking at our FTE in 2014-15, I think the simple way for me to ask you all is, do you want to increase our former FTE, and how much? So that Carrie and Jensen Strategies can go, oh, okay, now we know how many people you want to have on your staff, so we can figure out how much it's going to cost to get them here and then pay for them every year.
And what was our population during this time?
I will tell you that population probably was about 15.4, 15.5 back then. But I don't believe the population numbers today at 16.1 on our sign.
It's gonna be 17.5.
Yeah, because that compared,
Like
when I look at
16.1 or 16.3
Right.
now.
Well, it's the last census, right?
right, but since
All the apartments. that
then
have
we've
gone
added,
in.
Eagle Ridge on the top of the hill. We've added a whole bunch of single family ones that are coming in down here, condos. I mean, it's probably closer to 17.5 effectively the population. The other thing is that back in 2015, we did not have Amazon Fulfillment Center, didn't exist. The Troutdale Cubes didn't exist. So we've had those industrial increases out there also. So.
Okay. Rich?
So this is directed to our city manager. In the budget that you point out here, we have an FTE of 21.5. And in the spreadsheet, we have an FTE of 25.5. Can you account for what the
Yes.
difference is there?
I can, yes. Sorry, I didn't go through the spreadsheet as careful. I didn't prepare the spreadsheet, and I didn't go through it as carefully as I should. There's a couple things to know about our FTE. The FTE on here is the 26, wait, no, I'm sorry, the 24 FTE is just the sworn deputies. And it's going to be less than what's in the budget, because in the budget, we had SROs and a assignment to TriMet. And those were, because you remember from budget rules, you have to put the whole expense in your budget, but you don't show that, oh, it's being paid by somebody else. That's another part of the budget. So actually, when you look at the police department budget FTE, that's higher than what it really is, because we didn't get the benefit from all those positions in terms of protecting us.
Well, I wasn't referring to just sworn officers. The total FTE in 2014-15 is 21.5. And the number of FTE referenced in the spreadsheet for 14-15 budget is 25.5, so a difference of
My bad for
4.
not checking the form. I think that's a mistake, that 25.5, because you've got the sergeants and the lieutenant, which is 5, administrative and chief, which is, puts us at 7.
Yeah, it points it all out here. I was
Yeah.
just curious as what the difference is.
Yeah,
Let's
that was just a
Make
mistake.
note that there is some kind of difference there.
Yeah, because when I look at the other one, there's 7 over there, and you look at this one, 4, 7, 19, 21.5, but you take off 2, it's actually 19.5.
Didn't you say 2 SROs?
Yeah, but they're part of the year. That's the problem is, we got paid back for the 9 months of the year they were at the Reynolds School District, but in the summer, we took them back as beach deputies. And so we paid for the 3 months, 1/4 of the year.
Okay, and then the TriMet officer?
Yeah, and then we had a TriMet officer that we got reimbursed from TriMet.
28.5, and then if you take off 2, that's 26.5, and this is 25.5.
Yeah, for the whole department,
Yeah, it's not really,
hugely different. They're just
Like
the
the
ratio
outside
wrong,
line.
yeah. Which is-
Yeah, and it's accounted for in the budget, those differences.
right.
Yeah, and if you look at the other cities, you know, the total FTE for St. Helens is 24, Goose Bay is 28, the Dalles is 28, Pendleton is 32, the Dallas 27, and then Canby and Lebanon are much higher. But it just probably is the growth from 2014-15, that's probably maybe what our department would have been by now, something in the 28 to 30 range.
Well, I'm just noting the difference.
Yeah.
It's kind of immaterial because we'll need to decide what
Yeah,
the right size would be for Troutdale today. Right? That's all I had.
thank you, I was
point
gonna
that
tell
out.
you to do that, I forgot.
Thank you. Well, that's cumbersome.
Yeah. So, yeah, Jared, maybe if anybody else has any more comments, and maybe if Gary wants to
Yeah,
give his
Yeah.
observations and,
give a few observations where we were, where similar sized cities are today, and give a few thoughts, Carrie, that would be fantastic.
Certainly, I'd be honored to. First, I will make note that we'll take a look at the numbers between the prior budget and the spreadsheet that's been offered and make sure that those get reconciled. So whatever document we produce to you, we'll have those things squared away. But I will say that I've spent the last several days looking at your prior meetings, and I thought it had been very productive. You have gathered a lot of good information, in my opinion, from a police perspective. And I am, admittedly, I'm a big fan of municipal police agencies. I've spent 35 years in them and serving communities. So I certainly understand where you're coming from. It's kind of exciting to be able to provide the information and get the data that you need in order to understand the exact cost of what is needed. run a police agency and to restart a police agency. There are going to be costs involved in that. So we're looking to be a resource for the city of Troutdale in order to make good decisions going forward and how to provide police services that this community deserves.
Appreciate that. So just kind of knee-jerk looking at some of these similar population cities and the FDE where they're at, because obviously it varies quite a bit when you're looking at even Lebanon and Canby at 42 and 35 respectively, and then, you know, all the way down to St. Helens at 24. I mean, it's a pretty vast number, I guess.
Let me ask you a question, because I'm just playing around with the math. Let's just say an officer actually is on the road 46 weeks a year. He's got 6 weeks of vacation, sick time, holidays, things like that, maybe less. It looks like it takes 5 officers to cover 1 shift the whole year. Is there any metric within policing that gives you that, oh, I need to hire 5 people to have a 24/7 officer on the road, 365?
Absolutely. A lot of that, and I'm sure the captain would agree with me, a lot of that is going to be determined by what type of scheduling matrix you use. You know, you can certainly use an 8-5 matrix, which is oftentimes the most effective and probably the leanest as far as the number of staffing you can get. But the reality is, in today's world, that schedule is going to be very difficult to attract police officers to come to an agency. So you're going to be looking at some other type of scheduling matrix, which is going to increase the number of officers necessary to fill those positions. Generally speaking, and last time I took a look at my sheet, we're looking going to like the 410 schedule, which is fairly popular, although actually being modified a lot in current agencies. But you're looking at about 8 officers per shift. So you're looking, in order to cover that on a 410, you're going to need, I figured it was right around bare minimum, about 19 officers just for patrol in the city of Troutdale. Now that's bare minimum. That's not covering for those 6 weeks off that are you know, potentially 6 weeks off of training, vacation, sick leave that the officer might have. It's not covering for any other type of assignments, any type of duties, ancillary duties that are going to. So those are a bunch of things that you need to look at when you go out to attract police officers and look and develop a department. And we'll be providing you some information as to, you know, what it would take to fill each one of those models that you might desire.
So I don't know, maybe is it better to tell you, we want to make sure that we have 3 officers 24/7 on the road. We want to make sure we have 1 sergeant 24/7. We want to make sure we have 1 lieutenant just 8 hours, you know, a 40-hour week, a captain 40-hour week, and a 40-hour week chief plus the auxiliary. Would that be easier? Just tell you what kind of coverage we want, and then you can back.
Or is it easier to say, hey, here's our budget, or budget with the means, what can we get for this?
Well, as I see the scope and where we're starting right now, and I'm actually quite comfortable with this, is first, let's go back to where you were in 2014 and look at what you had. And what I've heard from the discussions over prior meetings is that there was at least a sense of contentment in the community with the Troutdale Police Department in 2014. And there were, you know, that's what I've heard. Did I misread that?
Go ahead, Rich.
I'll just add some context here.
Sure.
So we also had a cadet program as well. And that provided some extra coverage that didn't cost as much, but they're not officers, you know, full-time officers. They kind of helped out at the park, or they helped out at, you know, an event that may be going on or something like that. And really what that was is to bring up the younger generation and bring them up into the field. But it also had some benefits as well. And then we typically would have 2 officers on patrol at all times. This is 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We always had 2 officers. There's usually somebody who's supervisory, and then you have your state requirements, right, that you have to meet, and somebody's got to overlook all that.
Exactly.
And we had a lieutenant that we hired on. Oh, boy, when was that? We promoted one of our sergeants to a lieutenant, probably
Yeah.
in like the last year or two of the Troutdale Police Department.
Yeah, probably about 09 or something.
Yeah,
Kerry, just so you know, Rich was on council when we did the transition,
Okay,
and Tanny's been on, as the chair of the budget committee since 1948, was it?
43, I think.
Okay, I'm sorry.
well, I've been on budget.
A while.
I've been on budget since 2008 myself, so that's why I know a lot of the history.
excellent.
And then, just so you know where I stand, I actually believe in paying people well for the work that they do.
Mhm.
I would not want to try to, hey, can we get somebody cheaper?
Right.
Right? You pay them for the work that they're doing, you pay them fairly. So just get that on the table there. At least that's my opinion.
That's another thing, and that's what he'll do is that number one is law enforcement has struggled the last 5 years to hire people.
Absolutely.
Luckily, Captain Asbo, you guys are pretty full now, aren't you? Because you're such a wonderful captain to work for, right?
That is correct. Our law enforcement division is fully staffed, which is, as you all know, increasingly uncommon, certainly regionally, but even nationally.
That's
other
good.
thing-
That's
He's
very
in a
good
very
news. In
lucky
these times,
position right now in this world.
The
yeah,
other
it's-
thing to consider is that our competition for officers is Gresham, Multnomah County Sheriff, City of Portland, Lake Oswego, Clackamas County Sheriffs, and Multnomah County just went through a salary review for deputies, and they bumped up their salary ranges like 5%. Because if you're going to attract anybody, you can't be paying less than the other people in the area.
And these are all fine organizations, right?
Yeah.
They're not undesirable places to work or you have to bump up the
Well, we'll talk about Portland later, but the other ones, you're right.
That's part of the challenges that we're going to present to you. And the other thing, if you're going to rekindle a police department, you certainly want to go and get a blend of officers. You're going to want to get some tenured officers coming from other departments. And you're going to, look at some newer officers and maybe just been academy trained and coming in. So that you're going to have a pay scale that's going to range the full spectrum of the pay bands. And that there's going to be challenges to recruiting each of them. And again, I applaud Multnomah County for being fully staffed in patrol, because that is a rarity, even in well-paid, well-respected departments nowadays. I think you've heard, and read, you can't hide from it. Anytime you turn on the news, national news, it is difficult to fill law enforcement positions right now. And there are some enormous challenges out there. We'll provide you kind of the spectrum of what some agencies are doing just to get officers hired to take
Yeah,
the job.
and Troutdale is not a defund the police type city.
Right, not at all.
Not anywhere close.
No, and I think, that's certainly part of the driver, but there's just other things that are affecting people to look at other positions other than law enforcement. I mean, you may not be a defunded police city, but you're a city that expects police coverage 24/7, 365. And we have to have a workforce willing to work 24/7, 365. And that's a challenge nowadays too. And I just heard a comment the other day, 845,000 people have left the workforce in this country. So, some of those, they're working remotely, they're doing things on their own, independent and the like. And so that kind of mindset we're fighting as well. So there's challenges, and there's ways to address those challenges, which we believe we'll present to you in this final report. We've already had some discussions about it. So, but you'll have to understand what those are.
That's a difficult job.
Yeah.
I'm a good engineer. I was excellent in the military, but I would suck as an officer. I'm glad there are people who do it.
We are too, and I'll tell you, and I think the captain would agree with me on this, law enforcement, in my mind, and I am biased, there's no doubt about it, have exceptional people on its staff, just committed and exceptional people who want to serve the public and do the right thing. So they're out there. It's just a matter of getting them into the positions you want to fill.
I'm sorry.
No.
If it's helpful, I could add a little bit of context on what FTE is and because FTE is a number on paper, but what is the reality of what is really available to Troutdale on a daily basis per shift? If that's helpful, I can share that. If not, I can leave it aside. So I'll leave that up to the committee.
Yeah, give us one quick second, Doug. I just want to make sure we're done with our hypothetical Troutdale Police Department before we move on to, more Multnomah County specifics.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's really
Yeah,
giving
yeah,
direction
the-
to Carrie
the
as
only-
to how big a department you
Yeah,
want.
how big of a department? Because it's also, I am concerned, and I've voiced this multiple times throughout our, meetings, is the special services that Multnomah County Sheriff brings. Okay, their detective services, the Hope Team, all the extra things that we are not going to have with a Troutdale Police Department of just getting it running. There's, I'm sure, a lot of specialty things behind the scenes that we don't even see.
Right.
So that we're not going to have access to. So it just makes me nervous. Or have we looked at everything from every angle, and some of those metrics that maybe just aren't resonating, jumping off the page. So I'm just voicing that again.
Right, yeah, and what we're trying to come up with here, because every time we have this discussion, it happened in 2015, it's like, well, why can't we keep the Troutdale Police Department, or why can't we bring it back? Well, to answer that intelligently, we have to tell the citizens, well, it'll take X amount to get it started up again, because we have a beautiful building to put them in.
Right.
But it'll be empty and there'll be no cars in the lot. And so how are we gonna, and then second of all, what is it in today's market? What will it cost us annually to have our own
And then
department?
once we bring it back, and then, yeah, what does that mean for a detective service once we need a detective? And
Well,
once we
we,
need
the budget
the
has
Hope
one.
Team, and then we need the Hope Team. Yeah, one.
Yeah.
And how many is available to us right now if we need it, right?
Right,
If we have multiple
yeah.
needs for a detective, there's greater resources or
Yeah.
greater depth.
How many detectives do we have before? Wasn't it one and, we had two?
Two.
And they worked with Monoma County.
Right, and so I guess the question for you would be, what of those services are different than they were back in
I'm just
2015?
making sure, that's what I'm saying. I don't know. I'm just, what else are we gonna be missing that we're not asking a question?
If I may, let me say
Absolutely.
this. My experience has been, and I've worked in multiple agencies of various sizes, from a couple thousand to an agency that at one point was down to 20 officers. And the simple fact is this: the same tasks have to be accomplished no matter what size police agency you have. You have to be able to handle investigations. You have to handle basic patrols. You got to be able to deal with special events. You have to handle the traffic issues that come up and the whole myriad of things that come up. Property and evidence we've talked about, the records maintenance. You have to have some means of communications, the dispatching, 911 dispatching and such, be it with in-house or out by outside contract. So all of those things have to be provided regardless of what size agency you have. There's a whole myriad of examples of how different agencies handle it. I think what I heard from previous discussion is that in 2014, you did have one single detective assigned, and then you were rotating in a patrol officer for, I believe, 18 to 24 month period of time to augment that detective service, investigative services, and as good training opportunities as well. It sounds like you also had a East County Major Crimes Investigation Task Force, which you were joining with the other cities at the time, which Fairfield and Gresham and such, where if you had a major investigation such as a homicide, I suspect that would convene. And that's a model that's being followed at many locales within this region, where they bring multiple agencies together. There's shared benefit to it. Some agencies are going to be giving staff more than they might receive the staff there, which is not bad, but they're bringing in the experience that they gain. So there are ways to do that. The fact is, it's different. I was trying to think of a good analogy to give you on this, so I apologize if this falls flat, but let me tell you this. I mean, the agencies I worked at, when we had to go out and search for somebody, be it a missing person or a suspect or something like that, and we had a large area to cover, in some agencies, we would call in for air support to come in and use a helicopter or fixed wing to go in and do a search of that area. It's very, very efficient. It was able to cover that search area in a very reasonable amount of time. But if we didn't have air support available, we had to use staff. It took us a lot longer. It took it was much more arduous for us to complete the task, but we still had to do it, even though we didn't have that other resource available. And I would share with you that I think the same situation occurs right now. There are ways to do it, and part of it is building alliances with your allied agencies. But it is give and take situation that I think this committee and the city of Troutdale has to make a decision on in the end.
Okay. Just to note, Gresham Police Department has a drone program, which I think is forward thinking of that.
They're forward thinking for a broke community.
Yeah.
Victoria.
While we're talking about our hypothetical police department, my concerns were, we have a little over a year before the contract runs out. And as he was saying, it's difficult to get police officers, but I did some research and it's also very difficult to get any equipment, police cars. They're on waiting lists of up to a year. So it'd be very hard to get this done by the time the contract ran out.
This is
Can we
true.
have a shorter contract?
If the council approved wanting to restart it based upon the information, the numbers, that was something we would absolutely ask the sheriff's office to do if we were going that direction, to extend it less than the 10 years. So yeah, we would. We just have to wait and see. Is that the choice that you recommend based on once you get the information in, or not? That does bring up logistics issues. I was talking to Captain Asbo the other day, as I was mentioning to Carrie earlier. The reason you still see the Troutdale police car driving around town 8 years after we sold it to them is because they can't get it replaced. It's hard to get patrol vehicles. It's nostalgic, but other than that,
Yeah.
No, you're right, there are certainly a lot of challenges, and I can tell you over my years of experience in seeing agencies move from a contract agency to their own police department, it's very difficult to start on day one fully functional. There's always going to be some sort of buildup and transition in place. And the challenges based upon the size of the department you're starting is going to be, it's almost inverted. It sometimes might be easier to start a larger agency because you're going to be bringing in a larger body of people that you can spread some tasks around than a smaller agency because there might be overload. So there will be some challenges for you to face as well. Equipment is absolutely true too. I've heard, I haven't seen it and personally witnessed it in the last couple of years, but I've heard about the difficulties of getting not only radios, police cars, computers that we use, everything is very hard right now.
yeah, if you're going to want to recreate what we currently have as law enforcement coverage, I mean, let's kind of go through the FTEs here to kind of figure out, well, what are we getting now? And you can decide, do we want to keep that or get something more? Of course, this provides for one full-time chief. We contract for 2/3 of Captain Asbo's time, which I would venture none of our chiefs have spent that much time in the city. So that is an improvement over our current service, have one full-time person. There's a administrative specialist. We pay for one in our current contract, so you need another one. A lieutenant. Yeah, but Captain Asbo, you guys have a lieutenant on 24/7. It's just they cover the whole county, not necessarily District 60 and 70, correct?
That is correct. We have 2 lieutenants, so a day shift lieutenant and an afternoon night shift lieutenant, and they are responsible for all patrol.
Yeah, and then sergeant, we had 4 sergeants back then, but currently, even though they don't just do our 2 districts, it would take at least 5 sergeant positions, wouldn't it, Carrie or Doug, to have it 24/7, what we didn't have before? So that might be an area to increase sergeants up to at least 5 to get better coverage for sergeants.
For true 24/7, 365, absolutely.
So that would be, if I'm looking at page 62 of the budget, that's a possibility, +1 you could put there in terms of the sergeant. I don't know if you have a full-time lieutenant and a full-time chief, maybe you can live with just one lieutenant who works the day shift. And if you've got sergeants 24/7, so you're kind of got more on each end than we currently did have before.
Right. How you blend the sergeants, having the sergeants on duty and coverage will be a challenge for you as far as filling the 24/7 coverage. And those are part of the trade-offs you're going to ask. How important is that to you? I would suspect your workload is going to be a big dictate on that. How many calls for service are you experiencing during certain hours of the morning? Do you need a sergeant there? What, maybe you alter the shifts. So there's different models that you can move forward with to make that coverage. As far as the lieutenant is concerned, I suspect in the 2014 model, that lieutenant was, yes, a watch commander, but probably handled a whole myriad of administrative duties as well. I suspect they were probably in charge of some training, the recruitment, onboarding processes, all of those types of things, in addition to being the watch commander for the patrol services.
Of the two officers that were on patrol in Troutdale, one was usually a sergeant, the other one would have been an officer.
So you had a sergeant on and an officer 24/7?
Patrol, yeah.
Okay,
Well, we had 4 sergeants total, right?
4 sergeants, so yeah.
So,
Yeah.
You had some where it was just 2 officers. And as I explained to the city manager here, I mean, I've, again, working on large agencies. I doubt that it happens too often with the sheriff's department, but, even in large agencies, we've gone some hours where there wasn't necessarily a supervisor on duty. We had to put a lead police officer in charge for a couple of hours due to illness, due to emergency, something else, even sometimes we had to have a sergeant leave the city because they had to be maybe in the local trauma center for some reason or another. So we had to have an officer take charge of the city for a couple of hours.
you know, vacations and sick time come up. and stuff.
Absolutely.
Usually, I think we always kept somebody of a supervisory senior role available, whether it be the chief or the lieutenant or the sergeant, somebody, because there are things that come up that you just need a more experienced person to be able to set the judgment, right, on how we should react to certain things.
Exactly. And Captain, correct me if I'm wrong, if I heard you correctly, you have 2 lieutenants, one for day shift, one for days, one for nights. So they're obviously not necessarily on site in the field 7 days a week, but they're available for call during their responsible hours.
That's correct.
Okay.
They'll pick up on the radio when something's going on.
Yeah, but
Even
it
if
sounds like they're,
even if they're not in town, they'll still pick up.
well,
on
it
the
sounds like they might not actually even be on duty. They're on an on-call status, correct?
So they work 4-10 schedules.
Okay.
So just like I do. So there is days where there is no lieutenant on site, but they have an on-call schedule. So they're accessible if some command staff member, whether it be myself or one of the lieutenants, is on call 24/7.
It's very similar to what you had with your one detective. That detective worked a 40-hour work week or was scheduled a 40-hour work week. But if something went down at 2 o'clock in the morning when they were off duty, they were being called in to assist.
Yeah, I think we did have overtime pay sometimes.
Well, I'm sorry to chuckle, but I will tell you that as we provide the numbers to you, you definitely will have overtime pay. That is an absolute essential factor in police work.
Right.
So I guess the question is, the committee want to increase anything under the management budget there in terms of FTE? Want to increase the sergeant by 1? You want to increase the lieutenant?
But is that more of our subject matter expert to tell us based
Sure.
on population, based on geography, based on current regulations and what,
You can
state
have
guidance and everything else. This is our median of where to start with.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then go from, I guess that's my suggestion, is then go from there listening to our expert, and then, hey, we as a group don't feel, can we boost this up, or oh, holy crap, that's a lot of money. Can we make adjustments, or what?
Well, that's
can we
true. Once
do?
they come back with the numbers, you can always
Yeah.
say, we can't afford that. Well, the other thing is just so you work, Captain Asbo worked at Fairview, police officer, so he has municipal experience locally too. So I guess
I think that's a very good point that you're making right there. Because we know that we want 2 people on patrol.
Yeah.
My personal feeling is one of them should be senior, right? And I don't know what people think about SRO and somebody at the park, but it seems like having an SRO and somebody at the park during the peak season is nice to have, right?
I will say what we have found, and that's one of the reasons we modified the sheriff's contract is, the SRO, we didn't pay for 9 months of the year because the school district pays us back for that. So we don't need to include an SRO in the budget, because if we needed to add it, because Reynolds, if we did this and Reynolds wanted to use this, then we'd add the position, they'd pay for it. So it wouldn't be part of the overall calculation. But when it comes to the beach deputies, we took those 2 SROs, and for 3 months of the year, they were beach deputies. However, in reality, they did a lot of other stuff too, because on a rainy Friday or Saturday, they're not gonna go down there on the beach on their quads. They're gonna go out. The chief will say, well, then go do traffic work, go do this. And so they weren't designated just that's all they did. They were assigned, you have your own police department, it's easy just to reassign them if they don't need them down at the park. So, and that's what we worked with the sheriff's office. We kind of changed it so that those beach 950 hours are more flexible than just beach. They can do patrol work also when they're not needed at the beach.
100%.
And if I may, and I think this is addressing something that you started this discussion with, as you're looking across this spreadsheet, you see, I mean, there's a pretty wide range of staffing levels by these agencies of fairly comparable sizes to you. And that comes down to what a municipal police agency is. It's tailored to fit the community that it serves. So what their needs are. The 24/7 patrol level is pretty much something everybody wants, okay? How important is traffic enforcement to you? How important is the SRO program or some other type of a DARE education program, which is something else that you've had in the past? Even a great gang intervention program, any of those types of things. All of those are what's going to dictate how many more officers you're going to have on staff or need on staff to accomplish those, what I'll call Troutdale unique programs. And that's the question that will give you what that might entail for you to provide those services should you want them, but the decision to have them would ultimately rest with the community of Troutdale.
Just as a disclaimer for the members of this committee, I do have conflict of interest because my wife is a school teacher at Reynolds, and our daughter, when she was going there, was saved by an SRO, so that kind of skews my thinking. I consider gun-free zones kind of like open fields, that if you don't have somebody there that can respond, you've got problems.
So I guess that's a good thing, get any input from Captain Asbo and Carrie, and I guess ask Carrie to go back and then create from your input, the police department.
I think Tanny might want to make a comment.
Can you tell us what base services we would receive from the county?
I cannot.
Okay.
No, I think that's more.
Can somebody find that out? That's been asked a lot.
Yes.
Well, and that's a question, Captain Asbo, just for your information. The question comes up is if we did not have a police department and we didn't have a contract with Multnomah County Sheriff, what would the county do just anyway in terms of having deputies around? It's kind of like what is going on in Wood Village. Wood Village's contract is like 1 page long. There's no requirements for any FTEs or any particular time. They simply pay to make sure they come when they call. And there's no patrol, regular patrol in Wood Village at all.
But they're really busy in Wood Village.
Yeah, they are. If you look at the call volumes, and basically, I don't know. Well, that's a good question, Captain Asbo. When Wood Village calls, who answers? Do our patrol deputies go there? Is it
So when you say ours, I'm assuming you mean Multnomah counties. Is that correct? Or are you
I
referring
mean,
to?
our two District 60 and 70 deputies, are they available? I assume that if Wood Village calls, they have no.
Wood Village is assigned its own district, so it has an assigned district car.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Did you ever find that map yet? Because that district can't just be Wood Village. It's only 1 square mile, as we know. How
So
big is
the Wood Village district is Wood Village, and it also includes Maywood Park, which is also a contract city.
Okay.
Well, and practicality, what I notice in the community is when there's a problem, boom, they're there. You don't just have your 2 officers, you have more, right? Depending on the level of the incident. And so they do respond where they're needed and most important, regardless of what jurisdiction.
And I think if I may, I can probably add some clarity as we talk about what is really available to the city of Fairview at any given time versus what it says on a list of how many FTEs are assigned. So, because I think the gentleman makes an excellent point as to, the number of deputies that arrive are the number of deputies that are needed for the call versus you only have X number assigned to Troutdale or X number assigned to any given district.
Yeah, it's like when Troutdale had 2 officers on the road, unless it was something really big, it was just the 2 officers that showed up.
Not usually, no.
Well, the sheriffs would back it up occasionally, or occasionally.
Quite a bit.
Right, if it was really big and you needed something, but the sheriff's office, they're all one big happy family, so if the 2 patrol deputies in Troutdale need help, it's quickly calls out, and it's probably, I don't know, Captain, is that probably more responsive than what the system we had before when you were at Fairview? I mean, if a deputy was out another call, who would back you up if you?
Well, that is the challenge when you are counting on outside agencies and a variety of outside agencies to provide that coverage, which of course in Troutdale and in Fairview where I worked, we had agreements with all those agencies to assist us when we called for cover, but that was always dependent on that agency's ability to clear the calls they were on and come cover us. So when you look at an agency like Gresham that has a really high call volume and their limited number of officers are frequently tied up on calls or busy, then that makes that more challenging to get that coverage. So yes, we did count on agreements with outside agencies to provide that support when we had one of those big calls, but the problematic part of that is that it's based on their ability to clear and come to those calls.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, and Captain, please, if you have a different opinion, I appreciate hearing it, but the calls for service and prioritization, the system that's going on, you're all going through BOEX, so everybody's working on the same, although I'm not sure that every individual agency within, like Gresham's priority 3 calls would be parallel to what, say, the city of Portland is. Their priority 3 calls, they might include something as a priority 3 call that is different than what Gresham is. So Gresham might require 2 officers to respond to a priority 3 call, whereas city of Portland may not. So if Gresham is out of resources and they're calling for assistance, saying we have only 1 officer and we're trying to respond to this priority 3 call, the outlied agencies might say, well, that's a priority 3 call. We don't send 2 officers to that, and our officers are busy on something else. That might come into play in certain circumstances. But for the most part, probably I'd say 80–90% of the time, they align. A priority 1 call is a priority 1 call. If something is going on urgent, I think you're going to see where your allied agencies are going to come to assist, assuming that they have the resources available, because it's not uncommon for multiple priority 1s to be going on at the same time in a region. And they're going to have their officers assigned over there. If they can break someone loose, they'll send it out here, but otherwise, you are kind of on your own.
Wouldn't it flip though, like if you had a priority one call, let's say Wood Village, and you had 2 officers working Troutdale? Couldn't those people be pulled into Wood Village to answer that call?
Well, Captain, you're probably best to answer that. I have my belief.
Yeah, that's correct. We certainly we provide our own coverage. So just like if a call required multiple or more than the 2 assigned deputies in Troutdale, we would pull those from whatever districts we needed to accommodate that call. And same thing with our other contract cities in an unincorporated county. So we'll utilize the number of deputies that are needed to respond to that call.
And if I may, I would say that that is one benefit of the contract arrangement like you have right now, particularly when you have neighboring jurisdictions being served by the same agency. It's a lot more fluid for them to bring in additional resources when needed, and then move them out to another jurisdiction when necessary. So their movement is more fluid. Not that it's unheard of when you have your own independent police agency, but as you can imagine, they're all one organization.
Jeffrey, can you mute?
This could be him,
Jeffrey, can you mute?
Sorry.
So as part of this discussion, you would remember that not only did the inner cities help each other, and you want that because you want to keep officers safe. You don't want to say, well, that's Gresham, we're not going to worry about them. But those are usually your higher level calls that are a little more dangerous. They're not the norm, right? And you want that fluidity. But we also would sometimes, our lieutenant would go out, or you would see our chief go out and handle maybe something else to provide the resources necessary. So you did see other officers responding that weren't necessarily on patrol at the time because they needed to, right?
And I will say, having been part of that, your lieutenant who goes out to that scene to help assist that other agency with that particular incident and such, their time is then divided by assisting that other agency and monitoring the activities back home in Troutdale to then make the decision, we need to pull some of our officers back and send them back to the city.
Yeah, they've always done a good job of making those judgment calls, whether it's Sonoma County or whether it was the previous Troutdale Police Agency or the agencies around us. They've always done a pretty good job in this area.
Yeah, yes, and I would agree. My experience up here is, for the most part, and elsewhere where I've worked, is for the most part that law enforcement agencies work very collaboratively with each other. Sheriff's departments, municipal agencies. Huh?
It's a survival thing.
Well, it is a survival thing, and quite frankly, it's just a professional ethic that we are going to support each other in the job that they need to do and helping serving the citizens. So
I think another way to look at it is maybe suggesting to Carrie is to create a police department that provides us our current coverage with the sheriff's office, and note that in addition to the 22 deputies 24/7, we also have 1.5 FTE of floater, in that we have our community resource deputy, Nick, and we have a 0.5 FTE beach deputies that we use for other things. And maybe that's the model they start with is.
Well, I would also say, tongue in cheek then, outsider looking in, subject matter expert, once again, population,
Right.
geographical, anything else you want to add that jumps in, glaring or not so, but hey, this is a good suggestion as well. But once again, you are our consultant, so we're leaning on you to give us I feel like we're speaking for the body, we're leaning on you to give us a starting point. Then we could try to give our community insight of where we want to kind of tweak.
I like the last 2 comments. I agree with that.
So
The only thing I'd ask is, Captain Asbo, you've been around this city for a while and you patrolled Fairview before that. Is there anything about the city of Troutdale that would mean we shouldn't be considered in the same ballpark of other similar sized cities with similar geographical boundaries and population? There's just anything unique about Troutdale that would take us outside that assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Ray, because as I look over the cities on this spreadsheet here, you know, something that's unique about Troutdale is one, it's part of a major metropolitan area. So, you know, there is a substantial change in potentially in crime rate when you enter into a major metropolitan area. You know, people who commit crimes don't recognize jurisdictional boundaries. Only, you know, only good people recognize that there's jurisdictional boundaries. So there's that. Additionally, you know, Troutdale is the gateway to one of the largest or the largest tourist destination in Oregon, the Columbia River Gorge. So you have a substantial, particularly in the summer, but realistically all year long, you have a substantial number of visitors that are coming through or stopping in Troutdale. So, you know, realistically, you have to look at that as, and certainly in the summer, as a population increase, because you've increased that base population significantly. So I think that, yes, Troutdale is certainly unique, and particularly based on the cities that were provided on the diagram. And, you know, as an example, I mean, realistically, on the average 24-hour period, Troutdale has access to 34 deputies and sergeants. So in a 24-hour period, we have put 34 sworn members out on patrol. Our patrol unit alone, which is housed in Troutdale, consists of 49 individuals. So when you look at what does the FTE say that Troutdale has and what realistically does Troutdale have, there's a significant difference in what is showing as FTE and what is really truly available and accessible to the Troutdale community members.
I will just add to that one, excuse me, Gary, one more thing is to emphasize that point that he just made is that, you know, when they need to, they can bring in a lot more. Remember we had the Black Lives Matter protests after the sad death in Minneapolis. We had a protest in downtown Troutdale at Mayor Square. I was here for the planning meeting in this room. There were 12 to 14 sheriff's deputies in the room planning together how they were going to respond if it blew up. It didn't. I mean, they were very peaceful. It was fine, but they were ready for anything, because what you saw with the George Floyd stuff around the country, you could have buildings being burned down. So they brought a lot of people in, resources, and they were around. As I recall, Captain, you guys weren't being real visible, but you were hiding in the weeds just in case. So that kind of planning that you can do with a larger agency, if you have a specific need.
They did a great job.
Yeah.
I was just going to add one thing to the uniqueness, I think, of Troutdale is from a law enforcement planning perspective, is your adjacency to Interstate 84. That's a major impact on law enforcement services, I'm sure.
One more comment, because we have a lot of good things to say about, you know, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. But the one thing that continually comes up is neighborhood policing.
Yes.
And when we're a small town feel and we want our own identity and we want to be separate from Gresham and Portland and we want to be Troutdale, that is one thing where it literally breaks our heart when we can't get the neighborhood policing that our community keeps asking for.
Absolutely. And in some earlier discussions, there was a discussion of that discretionary patrol time. Okay, that is key to your neighborhood policing effort. That's how your officers spend their time connecting with the community. And quite frankly, that's where it's going to be different from community to community, okay? And from my perspective, I'll give you one example. This is in my past career. We had one of the things we encouraged our officers to do during their discretionary patrol time, and please keep your seats, was go visit a local donut shop. Okay, why? Because there was cadres of people from the community that just sat at each one of these tables every morning over coffee, chatting about what's going on in the community. You know, now they're doing donut with the cop. Well, the difference was we were sending the cop to their meeting, and their meetings and such. And that was part of what you would do with the idea of community policing at discretionary patrol time. Getting into those cadres of your community that are, want to see the officers. I heard in a prior meeting, one of your members talking about, I'm trying to remember the scenario. I think it had something, throwing rocks on the roof of the neighbor's house.
Oh, that was my daughter.
Your daughter,
Yeah.
okay. And throwing rocks, and the Troutdale officer responding out to do it. Now, I can tell you in some circumstances, and it must have been an ideal time, no other higher priority calls coming out, but it left an impression, and how that officer
She
dealt
wasn't
with
a problem after that.
But, I've seen officers, and I'm sure the sheriff's department does this as well, but they're going by one of your neighborhood parks during baseball, little league season and such, and maybe just standing along the fence and watching the games and those types of things. Those are the types of things that make the community recognize
100%.
that person serves Troutdale. And so,
Well, it's preventative in nature, right?
it absolutely,
Because,
well, it
like,
absolutely is.
She learned early on, you don't throw rocks.
Mhm.
Well, what else would she have gotten into without that intervention?
Absolutely, and it also kind of, it imparts upon her where she might go to if she needs help,
Right.
somebody who's a trusted individual. And so those challenges become larger or more difficult in larger agencies, okay? I mean, that's just a matter of fact. In an agency of 100,000 plus people, it becomes a little bit more difficult to do that because of call load, because of the basically the different things that have to be done. But ultimately, I think that's why I'm such a big fan of the localized police agencies, as small as you can get them, but as long as they can remain functional. You have to be able to remain functional. That is your neighborhood policing, I think, in a nutshell, is getting out there and learning what's going on in the neighborhood and being responsive to that. You're making, I think, and are we calling it a CSO position, community service officer?
Deputy.
Deputy community service?
Yeah, we
deputy,
currently have one that's beyond, he works 410s.
And I expect that part of the intent there was to address that very issue, is to deal with the very localized issues that are occurring here in Troutdale. Not uncommon. There is a large, about 150,000 population city in LA County right now that's been a contract city for decades. Actually, I think since it incorporated, and they're doing the exact same thing. They are starting up, and I was shocked when I saw it, they're advertising for police officers to be employees of the city, but they're going to create a very small department of about 10 officers with a person in the lead to do just that. They're going to keep the sheriff's department to be the primary law enforcement agency. They're not going to respond to calls for service as a rule. They'll back up as needed, and they're capable of doing so, but they're going to be responding to the various issues within the city. Depending upon what level, the problems they're dealing with, one of the concepts of policing that we've used over the years is called problem-oriented policing. They might just be targeting specific problems, but they could also just be a neighborhood policing unit where they're going to be going out to the neighborhood watch groups. I heard you guys talking about the neighborhood night out that occurs usually the first Tuesday of August every year. They might just be attending those types of events. We'll see what they do down there, but that's your neighborhood community policing.
We all have a lot of good ideas, but it's
Yes.
just a matter of currently getting them executed, so.
So some history on that is, what we saw is, when it was the Troutdale Police Department, they were here yesterday, here today, to be here tomorrow.
Mhm.
And if they got the problems in the community under control, they had an easier day the next day.
Yes.
Surely there's people that come in and out, like you said, close to I-84, there's going to be some things. But for the most part, if they got it under control, they had a better day the next day.
Correct.
And what we see with Monoma County Sheriff is they bid for their areas. I think they still do that, where you may not have the same officers this year you had last year. And so what the community deputy was for is to help bring some of that, if we can get it under control, get to know the city, keep their ear to the ground, see what's going on, kind of like what you're mentioning here.
Absolutely.
That was the attempt to get some of that back.
Mhm.
And I think Nick does actually a pretty good job. I'm proud of Nick.
Never heard anything negative.
No, he does well.
Yes. Agreed. So I think the marching orders for Carrie is to come back with a suggestion for us, right? On FTE and what it looks like based on all these uniquenesses of Troutdale and
What it would look like,
What
and
it would
then,
look
you know,
like.
I've heard a little bit about, okay, you have to have agreements in place and you could be
Right.
on an island. And I even think back to the time when we had the school shooting.
Mhm.
That was a very tragic event. But we were never told, like, you guys don't have SWAT, you don't have some of these things. If this ever happened, you'd be in trouble. I mean, kind of thing, but it was when it happened, everybody came. And so how do you get that type of relationship versus, well, we might not help you?
Well, at that time, we were at Troutdale Police Department.
We were, but it wasn't just Troutdale Police that was here.
Oh, no.
And that's what I'm saying
They came
is,
from all
Yeah.
over, yeah.
we want assurances.
You want to keep good relationships with your surrounding community and agencies.
you know, and not saying we would, but a lot of people are doing their own police within metropolitan areas. And how do they do it?
We can certainly look at that. Again, looking at the environment that we've had up here, you know, I've been up here since 2010. And Multnomah County, the Portland area, regional area and such, have had great relations, cross relations, alliances, if you will, with all the other neighboring agencies. So they do come together when the need is there. I wouldn't suspect, you know, however this ends up, I think that will remain. I think Troutdale's needs in those situations certainly would get addressed, okay? It's more the day-to-day operations that are going to be the focus of what a new department could or could not do for you, is what I would say.
Okay.
There's one other thing I wanted to add as far as the services, because I know it's been part of your discussions, but one of the things that we've already thought of is when we talk about the FTE and what you need for certain programs and such, we're also going to scan the world out there right now and see what's going on in different agencies, because there may be, you know, and I can assure you that there are different ways of doing things today than there were back in 2014. So maybe you don't have a gun-toting police officer perform this particular task. You talked about the HOPE team. I know a lot of agencies that use police officers as part of that, and I know a lot of agencies that are taking other approaches to do it as well. So we're going to give you kind of a blend of what those things are, and so you can see how you might be able to accomplish some of those tasks in different ways.
Yeah, we're just looking for ideas, so
Yep.
we're at the beginning
Yeah.
stages, so. Perfect.
If there's results attached to it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ideas that come out there that's,
Yeah, no, I don't think Troutdale is,
Yeah.
just in my opinion, cutting edge idea, new, we need to have some data to go with. So,
yeah, sometimes you make it worse.
But I do want to keep the meeting moving, but you feel good, Carrie, then about marching orders?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Can we just do a sanity check? Because we have a lot
Sure.
of the history, we've been yipping a lot with other members of the committee. Are we
Twyla,
off base or are we?
we haven't heard much from you. How are you feeling about where we're at?
No, I feel this is a great starting place. I think getting a good level set assessment is great way to gain information and kind of figure out how we move forward and the other questions we need to ask. I, like many, Multnomah County has, I think one of the things that our community maybe doesn't see or know is that there's 2 officers, because when you travel through our community, I'm certainly with what Captain Asbo was talking about, you see many more than that. And so it does put me in a little bit of anxiety of thinking of not having that much support, because a lot of times just that visual reminder makes people in the community feel safer, so.
I would agree.
I mean, for me, I agree with everything that's been said. I also would like, when Reynolds High School goes on lunch break, we are closed, but we used to be open, but we're closed at lunch. The kids still go out there. And, we've had issues at McDonald's. I know when I've personally had appointments and had the day off and gone to like Fred Meyer's, there's like 15, 16 kids, and not at Fred Meyer's, but they're at the I want to say the ice cream shop, the yogurt place at lunchtime. So my question is, I mean, as a citizen, I'm like, why are they out there? They should be in school. And I know we don't have control, but there's no place that I feel safe at that time. At that time I had like my granddaughter with me, and we couldn't even sit down, and we weren't even feeling safe that we could because of the kids that were there that should have been in the high school. And just to have the extra time in the community at the lunch hour, I think is really important. I know Multnomah County tries to do a really good job, but during those peak times at the high school, out in the community, it has been a concern for the community.
Sure.
And I think that's another uniqueness of, isn't Reynolds the second biggest population of high school in the state?
Huge.
So it's being the second biggest high school. It's a
Right.
lot of kids going in and out.
Exactly. No, and I'm sure that the deputies that are on patrol here currently are being aware of that information, try to be out there. And, those are some of the challenges. It's that beat knowledge that makes a big difference. And I'm sure that they're imparting that on the deputies as you would on your own Troutdale officers.
Victoria, any other comments before we move on to the next section?
No, just money.
Mr. Stephenson? Okay. All right. Thank you, Kerry. We're gonna move on to number 7. Chief Asbo. So if you could review service levels and FTE number for Multnomah County Sheriff's Office IGA with Troutdale, that'd be fantastic. Walk us through what you got.
Sure. Well, like we were starting to talk a little bit during that conversation about FTE versus reality, right? And so when we look at, as I look over this spreadsheet and I look at number of sworn FTE, realistically, there is 49 deputies assigned to the patrol unit. So that's 42 patrol, 2 school resource deputies, our 3 community resource deputies, including the Troutdale Community Resource Deputy, and our 2 Hope Team deputies. In addition to that, you have 8 patrol sergeants and 1 sergeant that manages the Hope Team, the community resource deputies, and the school resource deputies. So there's an additional 9 sergeants. You have myself as a captain, and then you have your 2 lieutenants. So I noticed that one of the things that was missing on this spreadsheet was the shifts and what those actually look like. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the shifts look like for the sheriff's office. So we have our day shift, which is 06 to 1600. So in that shift, we have a sergeant, 7 patrol deputies. During at least 4 days a week, you have your 3 community resource deputies. During the school week, you have, in addition to that, your 2 school resource deputies, your Hope Team Sergeant and your 2 Hope deputies. So 3 of those individuals, one being your Community Resource Deputy, are specifically assigned to Troutdale. But realistically, you're looking at substantially more than just those 3. On afternoon shift, which is 1400 to midnight, you have a sergeant and 8 patrol deputies and a lieutenant. 2 of those deputies are assigned specifically to Troutdale. Night shift, which is 2200 to 08 in the morning, you have 1 sergeant and 7 patrol deputies. Again, 2 of those are assigned to Troutdale. So you always 24/7 have at least 2 deputies assigned specifically to Troutdale and to respond to Troutdale calls. The exception to that is during the hours that the community resource deputy has, you have a additional 3rd deputy assigned to that. We also have what we call our Frank shift, which is like a mid-afternoon shift, and that runs from 1600 to 02, and that's an additional sergeant. So in those peak hours of call hours, we actually have 2 sergeants working on patrol as opposed to just 1. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview about what you look at as numbers versus what is actually available to that. And that's just within the patrol unit. So that's not really taking into account the fact that, there's nine detectives in Multnomah County and a detective sergeant, as well as a detective lieutenant and a detective captain. Additionally, our special investigations unit, and there's 5 members of the special investigations unit that are included. Of course, we have our river patrol unit, which again, Troutdale is unique in the sense that there's actually a river that runs right along Troutdale and brings a fair amount of community members out to utilize that river. So you have access to those. And then of course, all those other things that we kind of talked about in our Hope team. This year, we're adding a behavioral health specialist, which is a non-sworn position to the Hope team, which will also be available to Troutdale. And like I mentioned earlier, so on on the average 24-hour period, there's 34 sworn members that are working and are coming to and from the city of Troutdale and working out of that office within the Troutdale. So in looking over this spreadsheet, you can see that's substantially larger than any of those agencies have for even a total number of FTE, sworn FTEs. So that's just on a daily or a 24-hour basis. So I think that realistically, we're kind of looking at a couple different things, because you're looking at what is Troutdale looking at as FTEs versus what are they actually receiving every day. And I think you can see there's a substantial difference in that. And I think that was pointed out when we talk about, even though there may be only 2 deputies assigned to Troutdale, you see a lot more deputies than that, because they're coming and going. Their headquarters is based in Troutdale, so they're coming back there to write reports. They're coming into town to have coffee, have lunch. They're there during roll call. And with our shift schedule, because we have 2-hour overlaps on every shift schedule. So for 2 hours between every shift, you actually have between 14 and 15 deputies on patrol. So you actually, for a couple hours between every shift, you actually have 4 deputies assigned to Troutdale as opposed to just 2. So, and those are those overlap hours in that shift schedule I just gave you. So between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then between 10 o'clock and midnight in the evening. So that kind of covers just a overview of what's available out there. The other thing I wanted to touch on a little bit was, because as you talk about, so you can't talk about discretionary time with deputies and or officers, regardless of whether you're looking at a municipal police agency, without looking at what is the call load. Because discretionary time is only based on their ability to actually respond to calls for service, and what time is left outside of responding to calls for service and writing reports that are created by simply those calls for service. So as I kind of looked over and looked at the last 5 years in dispatch calls for service, just within the city of Troutdale, I actually found some kind of interesting news, which was good news, because there's actually been a reasonably substantial decrease in call load or calls for service since 2019 up to 2023. So looking back in 2019, about 5,748 calls were how many dispatch calls for service. And that was a combination of emergency or priority 1 and 2 calls for service and non-emergency calls for service. Obviously, the non-emergency calls for service being the lion's share of those calls. Looking forward to 2020 or 2023 last year, that number was down to 4,421. So a fairly significant decrease. And I think a lot of that decrease has to do with some of the specialty missions and specific targeted enforcement that the sheriff's office is doing. And I really wanted to kind of get to the bottom of where were some of those changes at. And as I looked over it, the biggest, when we look at person offenses and property offenses and offenses against society, the largest decrease, although they all had a decrease in calls for service, the largest decrease was in property offenses, which are truly those crimes that impact livability in any community, because those are like your motor vehicle thefts, your thefts from your shoplifting, all your different types of theft and larceny. So just as an example, since 2019, there's been a 30% decrease in motor vehicle theft, which is, I'm sure you're aware, was a big focus of the sheriff's office over about the last 3 to 4 years, and in working some of those stolen vehicle and gun interdiction missions. 51% decrease in vandalism. Overall, all property offenses across the board, there's a 37% decrease in property offenses. So we're seeing a substantial decrease in calls for service, but what we're also seeing is that the average time spent on calls over the last 5 years has increased substantially. So that tells me a couple things. One is that even though there's a decrease in calls for service, the deputies responding to those calls are turning that time into more time spent with each person who calls for service. So they're giving a better quality of service to each individual, balancing out that lesser number of calls for service. So I think that we're looking at, even though there's less calls for service, they're spending more time on each call. I think the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that the complexity of calls, and I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, as Ray mentioned. I spent my first 17 years at the Fairview Police Department as a city officer for the Fairview Police Department, and I can tell you the complexity of the calls that are coming out require more time. So when you look at those things and you start to think about what does discretionary time really mean and how much discretionary time is out there, you have to look at, do we want just enough police officers, the exact amount we need to, on paper, cover every shift for 365 days a year? Or do we want enough extra police officers that outside of just responding to calls for service, they still have the opportunity to do other things. And I think that is, you really look at some of the advantages of that community policing effort, especially when you look at focusing on those community resource deputies who aren't necessarily tied to the radio. So you have your 2 deputies that are assigned as the 2 district cars in Fairview, and they're tied to calls for service. So their main goal is to respond when somebody calls, whether that be a non-emergency call or an emergency call for service. But then by adding in that community resource deputy, that's your deputy who's not tied necessarily to that call. And that's the individual who is out there making those connections with business, coordinating community member groups, being that face out there, and sometimes dealing with those livability issues that, although in the big picture, when you look at, the lengthy list of different crimes that can occur from homicides on down to vandalisms, some of those livability issues get overshadowed by those response to emergency calls, those big calls, assaults and domestic situations. But having those community resource deputies, I think, really gets you the ability to get outside of just responding to those calls for service and responding to those livability things that are affecting the community. So whether that be, abandoned cars, or identifying that maybe there's a increase in car prowls in a particular neighborhood, that's what those community resource deputies can really focus on. Traffic safety issues in the community, and having that person there who doesn't have to look at what the whole county has going on, but they solely can look at what is the issues that are affecting the Troutdale community. I think that's a key element to accomplishing what it sounds to me like you all are trying to accomplish in that visibility and that community engagement piece. So I'll kind of leave it at that, and just I'll make myself available to questions. But if you have questions specific to what Troutdale's getting, or what you should be getting, or what you're seeing, I'll try my best to answer those.
Rich, go ahead.
Thank you, Captain Asbro. So just as a community member, rather involved in the community, I see things, I pay attention. And one of the things I seem to be noticing, and you know a lot more than I do about this, is that the people that we're responding to, there seems to be more and more of them that actually require more attention just to handle the call, meaning that they have deeper issues. And it seems to be more of a trend than what we've seen in the past. Would you say that's a fair statement, or you would know more than I would?
Yes, sir. I think that is right on point. I think that, even as we see that, there's a reduction in the number of calls, I think when you look at the amount of time spent on each call and you see that amount of time going up, that is a reflection of the complexity of that type of call. And I think we see that when, as an agency, when we're looking at the need for a mental health professional to focus on people who are suffering from mental health challenges. And, you look at something like the HOPE team and trying to have an impact on people experiencing houselessness. And so, yes, I agree 100% that there is definitely a added complexity to calls. Our deputies are needing to spend more time on those calls. And the days of when I started, where it was one call, one officer, and you went and you got that call taken care of and moved on to the next one. Those days are kind of gone. Calls not only are requiring more time, but calls, because of the level of violence involved in a lot of these calls, are requiring more than one deputy. So we're seeing a lot more calls where just by, out of pure procedure, and we're having to send multiple deputies to the same location. So, yes, complexity of call and the level of violence that, and I'm talking across the board, not specifically to Troutdale of this, but just the types of calls that we're receiving are requiring more deputies.
Yes, that's going along with what I'm observing as an outsider. Thank you.
And Chief Asbo, as a citizen and then also as hearing comments from the public when it comes to more specifically traffic, and I know we've talked about traffic on more than one occasion, and now we're talking this evening about community policing, and you talk about our community resource deputy, fantastic. But then it's almost like you have so many officers coming in and out of this building, it's almost a catch-22 for you. As we hear from other people who have been in to council meetings, and then my own neighborhood and my own interaction, seen personally, officers not writing tickets or not pulling people over or seeing traffic infractions as officers are coming back to this building and blatantly get ignored, or your own officers themselves are coming back to this building and maybe pulling traffic violations themselves on their way to the building. I don't know if that is necessarily the image that we are necessarily looking for. So that is a bit of a catch-22 when you're saying you have that many people coming in and out of this building all the time. It does make us feel safe, but then from a traffic perspective, I don't know if it always does make us feel warm and fuzzy, though. There's my 2 cents.
Well, and I'll just respond by saying I recognize that you had a specific incident that you're clearly referencing, and I'm happy to have a discussion with that about that incident with you. But as far as the traffic and actually, I'm assuming when you say traffic, you're talking about deputies making traffic stops. And you talked about having an increase in deputies making people feel safer. And realistically, that is the sole purpose of traffic enforcement, is to gain compliance with the law and make people safer. So I think that we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about, we're making people safer, we're making people feel safer. And when I look at where we need to focus efforts on traffic, there's 2 things that I look at. One of those is the livability issue. Is there a perception by community members that there's more traffic violations going on in this particular area than others? The other thing I look at is what is the statistical data that shows that being true. So we look at things like, as an example, when we have a speeding complaint, utilizing the city resources and putting out not only the speed trailer, but speed measuring devices. So we can get a good statistical idea of what is really going there. And as I mentioned, when we are looking at a time where, there's still an average of, well over 4,000 calls for service in Troutdale in a year, and that those calls are taking a longer time to respond to. We have to balance those discretionary time activities with not only doing traffic functions, other type of specialty missions, such as working on stolen vehicles or some of those specific missions, gun interdiction, and also that community engagement piece. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and there's a lot of things that we focus on. And so we're really looking at statistical data to help guide us on where is it that we need our focus. So I think we're kind of talking about the same, we're talking about accomplishing the same thing and just getting to it in different ways.
Ray?
In looking at the FTE that we contracted for, in some ways, it's really hard to know precisely how much or how more or how much less than is here is what we're really getting. As we've already discussed, we get an extra benefit of different specialties and people at the sheriff's office and the Hope team. But we also, this is not a criticism of anybody, but it's been very clear in my last 7 years of the 4 chiefs we've had, none of them have been able to spend anywhere close to 2/3 of their weekly time as the chief at all. We've not gotten that. As Captain Asbo, he's got a full-time job at the sheriff's office being in charge of the patrol division. When it comes to the administrative assistant, the records technician, I don't know if Troutdale work requires 1 full-time FTE or not. And so, and the detectives, I don't know, you'll probably have the statistics, Captain, of how many cases generally are carried because of Troutdale cases by the detective. I haven't seen those stats. Have you? Do you know?
Are you talking about overall cumulatively for like an entire year or just?
No, at any one time. Yeah, what's the general, I call it a caseload. What's the general caseload of detectives handling for Troutdale cases? I don't know how many open detective files there are for Troutdale.
I don't have that number with me, but I can certainly get you that number.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know. But in terms of what would be good for this group to do is looking at what we're currently paying for, using this as our template. How do we want to change that? What do we want to add to it to get additional services? Would be a good starting point, because this is kind of, I don't know if the county's going to come back, and I don't know if Captain Asbo knows, they're coming back and say, well, we've determined that we're actually spending X amount more time administratively, or we're spending blah, blah, blah. So we really, you have to pay for more to get the current service. I don't know that. I can't estimate or guess what they may say later. All I can say is what we should say to them, which is using this as a template. We would like to have this FTE, but these changes. And I think that would be a good start, because then I could take that and it gives me something to go to Gresham Police, see if they want to bid on it. And it gives something for the sheriff's office to begin working up in their finance department, what that would be. And in that suggestion, in looking at this myself, I would make a recommendation that a good place to start would be to make the captain/chief position a full-time position. And the contract requires that to be really the only primary job function for that officer is to be our chief. And we pay full-time for it, and they spend their primary job as being Troutdale chief. The second thing is that we have 0.5 FTE for SRO, which they use the SRO, but they weren't SROs really in the contract, because that was a whole different issue. It was beach deputies, which was a 0.5 FTE. My suggestion would be to increase that to a 1.0 FTE and make them a second community resource deputy. So there is Nick Bohr, and then there's a second community resource deputy. So in this FTE, we only increase it 1/3 in the chief's position and 0.5 in the beach patrol position. And that one's obviously renamed. That would be the suggestion I would make to give us what we're currently getting, plus what I think would enhance our services to the point of improving what we're getting now. And maybe it's more that community feel. Because as I talked to Captain Asbo the other day, I says, if we had a full-time captain who wasn't distracted by having a lot of other responsibilities at the sheriff's office, I would make sure they're directly overseeing, or I'd ask they directly oversee the 2 resource deputies, that they directly oversee our code compliance officer. Because they work together. And if we increase our current code compliance officer staffing, or our park security officers under our budget, that they'd be responsible for that too. So it kind of keeps a mini Troutdale Police Department under our chief. So that's actually how we might work the contract. But when it comes to costs and going back to the county, those would be my suggestions for what you might want to consider doing.
Thank you. And I'd add in a couple thoughts I had. You're right. It is, when you look at just responding to calls for service and and what do we need for FTEs per patrol that we don't have, or that in addition to or less than what we have. You know, I think the real basis for that, looking at, is there an increase or decrease in crime? Are our community members getting a deputy when they call for a deputy? I think that's kind of the key element to that piece of that. Excuse me. And looking over the last 5 years of call data, when you see a decrease in call load, but you also see a equal or greater decrease in crimes occurring, as we talked about with that reduction in property, substantial reduction in property crimes with a reduction also in person crimes, that would seem to give me the impression that you have the deputies out there responding to calls on the street and doing those kind of things that you need to do to address the criminal activity in Troutdale. Now, that being said, there's a whole nother piece to police service, and that's, as you mentioned, community engagement and visibility and that community feel. And I think that, you know, you're spot on when you talk about, you know, the community resource deputy and how adding an additional community resource deputy or an additional person to focus on community specific issues is going to help with that. So anytime you look at visibility, you want to take those officers that do have a lot of discretionary time or that aren't tied to the radio and having to just respond to calls all day long, they're all shift long rather, and get them out there. So I think that, you know, and I think we saw a success in that sense in just changing what that beach patrol position looked like in this last year. So I think that showed some proven success in being able to have a part-time of the year, that second community resource deputy. So I would absolutely encourage looking at adding another community resource deputy to double down on that work that Nick's doing out there. As far as the full-time chief of police, there's a couple things that I'd look at. And one is the current chief of police being utilized to the level that the contract already asked for? Are they being called in to attend the meetings that the contract asks for them to attend and things like that? Because, you know, that's where you're going to get some of that time back when you look at what's the percentage of that time that we're actually getting. But with that being said, if you're looking at not necessarily what's the amount of workload, but what's the value we get out of having a chief of police outside of just the workload, and is there a value in a perception or a feeling of more community or more community feeling like they have their own police agency, then there may be some value in that, having that chief of police there, that a community member goes, that's my chief of police until they retire, or, you know, versus what you kind of have now, as to where you have a chief of police for a few years and maybe they either move on or they move to a different position or things like that. Unfortunately, you're stuck with me for a few years because I got a while till I retire. So, but I think so. I guess the short answer is there could be some value in that chief of police in the sense of that feeling of community and connection. And I haven't been, this is the first one of these meetings I've been to, but I haven't heard much discussion amongst this group at all about crime levels or unanswered crime response or failing to respond to calls. What I've really heard is a focus on visibility and perception of not having as many police there, and that community feeling of they don't have their own police department. So I think if I just based it on what I've heard tonight, it sounds like that's really important to not only this committee here, but to the community. So I would say I would definitely look at those type of things, adding in community resource deputy, adding in a full-time chief of police, some of those things that are going to impact that sense of having your own police department.
Danny?
Thank you, Captain Asbo. And first off, I want to say, I think you guys do a great job. But as far as the community goes, you know, people are going to judge this based on what their own experiences are. And when they do have an experience with the police, and all I can give you is kind of what's happened in my neighborhood. And that is someone had their home broken into when they were gone last summer, and there was $12,000 worth of merchandise stole from their home. They called and they were told, we're not going to come out and write a report. And their response to me is, don't you volunteer up there? Can't you do something about this? I mean, I guess it's kind of like, if something like that is happening on the street, that would also make me understand why some of the statistics are lower. If something like a $12,000 burglary doesn't get reported, that's going to make some of the numbers look better. And I know this is kind of going back a ways, but you know, this building was set up to be like an emergency center. And recently, you know, we had a lot of ice, and one of my neighbors, and I don't know why they did this, they were out of power for 2 days and their phone didn't work and they needed to use a phone, and they knew that you could come up here and use the phone in an emergency. And they managed to trek through the ice, get up here, and the door's locked. And they're just like, how do you have the door locked on the police station? And I'm not trying to complain. I'm just saying these are, you know, my neighbors are saying, hey, we didn't used to be like that. Now we're like this. And why are we like this when, you know, what's happening?
That speaks to
So
community.
the first thing you mentioned, I am aware of what you're talking about with the theft. And so, you know, that was addressed. We spoke with those individuals. There was a misunderstanding. And so we worked out the misunderstanding and that report was taken. So, you know, that police officers, just like, you know, whether it's deputies or sergeants or captains, we aren't perfect. We don't always hear things that the way somebody's trying to explain them. So we do try to resolve those things when we do have those misunderstandings.
Appreciate it.
As far as the door being locked, so there was a period of time during that ice storm where our office also didn't have heat and it didn't have electricity. So, you know, in those types of instances, we kind of run out of options when we can't provide heat or electricity. And, you know, so our sole members that were at that office were just our patrol deputies, sergeants, and command staff. So we didn't have had to move our record staff, which usually works that front desk, over to a building that actually had heat in it. So that was why we had to lock the doors for a period of time, is just because we didn't have a heated place where we could put staff to manage that.
Ray?
I was just going to say, I'm just curious also to get opinions from anyone else as to what changes we should make to our current contract. So I have something to go back to the county with to start working on. And if you have any questions of Captain or Carrie.
I think we've probably got a few comments that we just need to get around the room.
Yeah.
Rich?
I just want to ask this question because in case it has relevance. One of the things I thought I heard brought up by our city manager was how many open cases we have. And Captain Asbro can correct me if I'm wrong, but last time I looked, it's typically more than you want to have it open as far as cases go. And when our investigators get bogged down being reactionary with open cases, it really puts pressure on them to spend time on those proactive investigations, the ones that lead you to preventing the next problem, and the time you get to spend with other agencies. And so we got to look beyond just open cases, but, you know, are we getting that time to respond to other agencies like we should? And are we spending enough time in being proactive?
Okay. I will jump in, going off of Ray's comments of where to add. I've been very vocal in the last two budget committees of, we need to have another resource officer, start budgeting for it sooner the better, so that we can start planning for it. So definitely, I support adding to that line, Ray. As far as the captain goes, I feel like I need to know what value we're really going to get out of that, whether or not that really reaches, is that money well spent, if it really reaches the community or not. I don't know. I'm not quite as sold on that one knee-jerk reaction. You know, does it have to be a captain? Spending the money on a captain? Could it be a lieutenant? Because there's no lieutenants in the building. I don't know. You know, it's how are we going to line them out? How, and I say we, but as a city, I just want to make sure we get our return on investment there. And whether or not it's 2/3 of the time still, I think we just need to have checks and balances in place to make sure that we as a city, as a community, as our citizens get their return on investment. But what is in place if we don't? What is that trigger or lever that comes back to the city? I don't know if it's a fine, if it's relief on the contract, if it's getting made up somewhere else, that if we don't get everything that we, whether it's the detective hours or the captain's hours or whose ever hours, there has to be some sort of penalty for not living up to the end of the contract.
The only suggestion is that, and Captain Asbo could probably tell you, if he has a part-time assignment that's outside the sheriff's office building, like internally, and he has to spend time with City of Troutdale business, he's being asked to create a timesheet every day of where his time is spent and how do you balance that. If it's simply a full-time and that's all they do, then there's not really much of a timesheet because that's the only thing they get to do. They don't have any other responsibilities. Well, they may have some small ones at the sheriff's office, of course, but it's just a 1/3 increase. It's a small increase, relatively speaking. And it eliminates that whole thing about, okay, Captain, how many hours did you spend on Troutdale this week? Let me see your timesheet. Oh crap, you owe me 4 hours next week. I need to spend more time on Troutdale next week. And it just seems like a logistic. The accountability is great, but when it comes to that kind of position, it's hard to logistically to figure that out.
No, I agree. We've had conversations about it.
Yeah.
But I am 100% behind you on trying to start budgeting for a resource officer and get another one going.
Like
if we decide to move forward with Multnomah County Sheriff.
Right, and that's why I think we already are paying for a half-time person. Why not increase that to one? Because now that we've modified the contract a little bit, we don't need them to chain themselves to the,
beach.
The beach.
Yeah.
They're down there when they need to be, but the rest of the year and the rest of the summer, they can be doing other things to support the other resource deputies, the patrol deputies, maybe doing traffic work if that's what we, direct them to do. It just gives us more discretion on what we want them to do.
Community policing, what we're looking for.
Right,
so.
right. Because the 2 patrol deputies in 60 and 70 district that are generally provide our background law enforcement coverage, they're going out in 8, they're getting, total of 800 to 900 calls. So theoretically, you do the math, that's, 400 calls for each. That's, a month. That works out to 10 calls a day or more. So they're busy doing other things. They can't necessarily do maybe the priority things that we want them to focus on other than just responding. I know, Captain Asma, I don't think there's much discretionary time for the patrol deputies, is there that they could do additional things that maybe Troutdale want them to do? The 2 patrol deputy districts?
No, I would agree with you, Ray. I think that when you look at the call load that they're going to and all the things that go with responding to calls, like report writing and follow-up investigations, that it does substantially hamper their discretionary time. And it's about, like on average, like they're going to roughly about 4,000 to 5,000 calls a year, which is about 14 calls per day, 100 calls per week. So that keeps 2 people pretty busy.
If we were going to do our job well, I would agree that we need to look at all the options of how does Troutdale get the level of service that we're seeking, whether that be from all the different options we've been mentioning, whether it's a Troutdale Police Department, Sonoma County Police Department, or any combination of other ideas, right? Because there's nothing inherently wrong with the professionalism of the Sonoma County Sheriff. They do a great job. But how do we get the level of service that we desire? And that's got to be one of the things we consider. How do we get that out of a contract with Sonoma County Sheriff, right?
Correct.
It's got to be one of the options.
Sure.
I agree with that, and I also want to look at what services we've been paying and not getting. So what's happening with that money? And, I'm sure it's going somewhere, but
Yeah, if we go down this road, how do we tighten up the contract?
that's correct.
Yeah, it's an imperfect art, because like I said earlier, how much, we don't have on the list a hope team that bounces into town to deal with homeless issues. But on the other hand, we're not getting the full percent of a captain, spending their time on. So it's like, these kind of contracts are always going to be a shot in the dark in some way. We have to generally estimate what kind of services are we receiving and come up with a dollar figure. Kerry, you were a chief in California, weren't you?
I was.
My understanding is there's a lot of cities in California who do contracts with the sheriff's office.
Absolutely. Very
And
common.
have you heard or seen of any better system that's any more precise than what you've heard that we're doing now?
No, there's pluses and minuses in all of the contracts. As I mentioned earlier, one that's had a decades-long contract with the LASO and Los Angeles County, and they're now looking to build their own little public safety department to address some of the things you need. They're not dissatisfied with the sheriff's department service or their basic law enforcement. They just feel they need something personal. But then there's, I can't remember the total number of cities just within Los Angeles that contract with the sheriff's department and have done so for years and have been very, very happy with it. Sacramento, Riverside have some very good contracts, cities as well. So it certainly is a model that can work very well.
Okay.
As I was saying, what I'm hearing, because if we err on the siding of asking them to bid a little bit more, if it comes back, maybe more than we can afford, you can always cut it back a little.
Right.
So, what I'm hearing is go ahead and see what it would cost to set up that, increase that captain time to a full-time chief and take that half-time FTE, make it a full-time FTE that's a second community resource deputy. And start that as a basis for negotiating a contract.
And then do we use that same model to try to get a bid from Gresham?
Yeah, I would use it, so I could use, same thing.
Okay.
And both of them are probably used, because this includes administrative costs, overhead costs. I mean, how much does payroll spend, like at Multnomah County, is it, 40 cents a day is what it costs for one deputy. I don't know, they have these formulas that figure out all this overhead stuff. And, this was 10 years ago, the first time they did it. I don't know what numbers we're gonna see this time. And Gresham maybe calculated differently. As you saw the example from Happy Valley with Clackamas County, they calculated differently. it's not a precise science. It really isn't for when these bids are, but we have to have a starting point to go back to them and say, all right, this is what you calculated before. These are the only tweaks we want in the base, FTE numbers. And they're gonna have to go down and look, at what that means now, because, we're paying approximately 40% more than this number here, because we have upwards of a 4 to 5% increase, 3 to 4% increase every year. So we're 4.5 million this current budget year. That started off with 2.8. So these numbers are all going to look different, but they should add up to the 4.5. You'd think. So I guess we're getting here in a little over 2 hours. Is there anything else you want me
Rich,
to?
you got any other comments before we?
If they don't add up to 4.5, go after Kenny.
All right. Yeah, he's here. He's not here. He has a checkbook.
Jeffrey, I see you're on. Did you have any comments, questions for Chief Asbo?
No, I don't at this time, but thank you.
Okay. Should I open up for public comment?
Yeah, if there's any public wants to say anything about this particular topic, might as
Paul,
well. Gosh.
Paul's on. I was going to give Paul a chance to ask anything or make any comment while he's on here. So I'm going to open it up for public comment for a moment. All I see on here is Paul though. So Paul, if you have any comments or want to make any statements for the record, I will open it up for you.
No, I'm good, Jordan. Thank you.
All right, Paul. Thank you, Chief Asbo. Appreciate your time.
All right, and Carrie, you have what you need, and let me know if you have any questions or if you get started on your work, and thank you.
Thank you all for having me and inviting me tonight. And please let me know if other questions arise. I'm happy to try to get whatever data you need or help out in any way I can.
You did throw a lot of figures at us tonight, Chief. I don't know if you could share a lot of when you're talking about how many people are in and out and times of shift times and everything, if you could recap a little bit maybe and send it out to us or send it to Ray, that would be fantastic. So maybe we could review it just to have a better grasp of all those numbers. I tried to doodle while you were talking, but you were talking pretty fast. So it'd be great to get those.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get those to Ray.
All right, thank you. All right, let's set our next meeting.
Which will be about fire.
Okay. Are we looking at next month, Ray?
Sure, first part of next month. I mean, whatever. Well, let's back up here.
I can do it more frequently if we need to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we have a very limited time to do both. Is once a month really ideal to do that? Because that seems like a lot.
No, I just know there's a lot of people on a lot of different
I know, I'm.
committees
I
and
know.
And they probably do need some time to coordinate, right? To get the people here. That we
if
want to talk to.
we're going to talk to anybody, yeah.
Yeah, and the other question is, what nights are best? We all got here on a Monday night. That worked great. If that consistently is
So
good.
what does March 4th look like for everybody? Or is the room open?
Well, I'm sure it's open Monday night. I didn't see any problems. I'm fine with March 4th. I'm
I
available.
just threw a date out.
I'm good.
Done.
Done, March
All right,
4th.
March 4th, 6:30 in this room.
Jeffrey, did that work for you, March 4th?
No, but I'll figure it out. I gotta work that day, but you guys pick the only 2 days I work. That's okay, I'll figure it out.
You only
I'll make it
work
happen.
2 days a month? Is that what he said?
That's what he said. He only-
All right, great. I'll get the announcements out, get the room reserved, get that all put together. Perfect.
Quick round robin, anybody else, any comments, concerns before I hear a motion? Quick looking around the room, Kenny, ladies.
Were we
Carol?
gonna discuss that issue?
I don't think the connection's real good to probably I'd rather have a face-to-face.
Okay.
Is that good? I'm not dismissing it. I just would rather do a face-to-face.
That's fine.
Okay. Tyler, you good?
Golden.
Good, good.
And I thought you did a wonderful job, Terry. Thank you for interacting with us.
Thanks, Rich, appreciate that. Any other concerns from staff? I will take a motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
I got a second from Tanny. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Nice to meet you.